Tobias Hargrove watched a third steer collapse against his ranch gate, then turned his wagon toward the woman he had called Unfit. 6 weeks earlier, he had refused to hire Callie Reyes because she did not look like someone who could endure hard outdoor work. Now, fever burned through the herd in the Powder River country, and red water stained the dust beneath cattle that had been healthy at dawn. If the sickness crossed the north fence, 3 neighboring ranches would lose their winter stock as well. Tobias had one night to swallow his pride and bring Callie back. But the broad-shouldered, very plus-size stock nurse he had humiliated kept her medicine bag packed for people who trusted her judgment, and when his wheels stopped outside her door, she did not rise to meet him. Callie sat at a pine table, repairing the leather handle of that bag with waxed thread. In the lamplight, her full cheeks were composed, her brown eyes steady beneath brows. Black hair was braided at her nape. Her dark green work dress fit without squeezing her broad waist. She had heard his wagon long before it stopped. Everybody within 10 miles knew the hard, even beat of the Cross H team. Tobias filled the doorway without entering. Dust silvered his black hair and beard. His left arm rested too carefully against his side, the old shoulder injury he tried to hide whenever men were watching. He removed his hat. "Ms. Reyes, I need your help." Callie pushed the needle through leather. "You needed a man who looked fit for the range." His jaw tightened, but he did not defend himself. "I was wrong." Those 3 words should have pleased her. Instead, they opened the bruise he had left at his gate while 12 ranch hands listened. He had looked at her body before he looked at the references in her hand. He had told her a woman of her size would slow a sick herd and endanger everyone sent to help her. She tied off the thread. "How many?" 7 down, 3 dead. More, trembling. "Urine?" His eyes sharpened. "Dark red." The anger inside her made room for something colder. Her father had described that color in the margins of a field notebook he carried from post to post as a civilian veterinary surgeon attached to cavalry units. He had taught Callie to feel heat at the base of a horn, to read the color beneath an eyelid, and to ask where an animal had grazed before asking what medicine it needed. "Any new cattle?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Callie placed the repaired bag on the table. "Then either you do not know your own herd or somebody is lying to you." Tobias glanced toward the yard as if the truth might be standing beside his wagon. "Come see them." "On conditions." He waited. "My word governs the sick ground. I choose who enters, which cattle move, and what gets destroyed. No foreman overrules me. Every hand who works under my direction receives full wages, even if you lose the herd. And if a neighbor's stock is at risk, you tell him before sunrise." That last demand cost him more than money. The Hargrove name stood on banknotes, freight contracts, and promises extending across the territory. Admitting disease could stop every buyer from Cheyenne to Miles City. "Agreed," he said. "Say it where your men can hear." His gaze met hers. "Agreed." Callie rose. She was a visibly obese woman, substantial through her belly, hips, and upper arms, and she had spent years watching strangers mistake softness for helplessness. She lifted the bag with one hand and her father's notebook with the other. "Then drive." The trip to the Cross H took less than an hour. Callie held the side rail while the wagon dropped through a dry wash, and each jolt made Tobias's left hand tighten. "Your shoulder is worse," she said. "It is not part of the herd." "It is if you fall beneath it." He slowed the horses. At the ranch gate, 30 men stood in a loose half-circle around 2 animals on the ground. The cattle's breath came short and hard. Flies worried their eyes. Beyond them, hundreds of steers shifted along the south pasture fence, uneasy at the smell of sickness. Wade Bell, the Cross H foreman, stepped forward. His clean red neckerchief looked almost festive against the dust. He had laughed loudest when Tobias turned Callie away. "You brought the nurse," Wade said. "We sent for a real surgeon." Tobias climbed down. Pain drained the color from his face when his boots struck earth, but his voice carried. Miss Reyes has charge of the sick ground. Her orders are mine. A man who refuses one can collect his wages and leave. Silence moved through the hands. Callie felt no triumph. A steer near the fence staggered. She went to it, asked two men to hold a rope barrier instead of crowding the animal, and knelt where she could study without being kicked. Its hide was hot. The gums were pale. Beneath the tail, small brown ticks clung in the folds of skin. "Lantern," she said. Wade did not move. A young hand named Ben Larkin brought one. Callie opened her father's notebook to a page softened by years of use. The words Spanish fever had been crossed out and replaced with Texas fever. Underneath, her father had drawn the same pale eyelid and written a question no Eastern professor had answered for him. Why do Southern cattle walk away while Northern cattle die after sharing their grass? She stood. Separate every animal showing fever. Put them in the East holding pen. No healthy cow crosses this ground. Bring water in clean barrels, not through the common trough. Wade snorted. You plan to cure fever with a fence? I plan to keep ignorance from carrying it. She walked the perimeter, lantern low. At the southern gate she found hoof marks deeper and narrower than those of the cross-H shorthorns. A few strands of coarse reddish hair caught on the lower rail. You said there were no new cattle, she told Tobias. There are none on my tally. Wade folded his arms. Strays pass through. From the far edge of the herd came the long, rising bawl of an animal unlike the shorthorns. Callie turned toward it. Bring me that steer. Nobody moved until Tobias nodded. Ben and another hand rode into the herd. They returned with a rangy red longhorn whose fresh cross-H brand was still swollen at the edges. The animal looked healthy. Ticks clustered beneath its tail and along the thin skin behind its foreleg. Callie heard her father's voice as clearly as if he were beside her. Do not ask only what is sick. Ask what can carry sickness without falling. Where did this animal come from? She asked. Wade reached for the lead rope. It is a stray. I will dispose of it. Callie closed her hand over the rope first. No. This one stays alive. Wade's pleasant expression thinned. Tobias looked from the fresh brand to his foreman. How many? One, maybe two. Nothing worth. How many? Wade shrugged. A small bargain lot, bought through Cheyenne. They were sound. Callie opened the longhorn's mouth, studied its eyes, then showed Tobias the ticks. Sound enough to carry what kills your native cattle. I cannot prove how. My father could not prove it either, but he saw the pattern at 3 army posts. Southern stock arrived healthy, local cattle shared the range, then the locals burned with fever. Can you cure them? Tobias asked. Callie looked toward the 3 still shapes near the gate. Some of the sick may live with shade, water, and rest. Some will not. The animals not yet exposed can be saved if we move faster than the fever. The nearest clean pasture lay north of Bitter Creek, 6 miles over broken ground. Moving 800 animals after dark was dangerous. Leaving them was worse. Callie divided the work. Ben gathered clean barrels. 2 riders marked sick cattle with white cloth tied high on the horn. 3 more inspected the native herd for heat and weakness. She ordered the southern longhorns into a separate stone-bottomed cut where they could not rub against the main herd. Saddles, ropes, and blankets used on the sick ground stayed there. Tobias obeyed without turning her instructions into his own. When Wade argued that the north grass belonged to winter rotation, Tobias answered, Tonight it belongs to Miss Reyes. The words reached Callie, but she did not let them soften her. Respect offered during a disaster was not yet character. It was only a beginning. They pushed the clean herd toward Bitter Creek beneath a moon as thin as scraped bone. Callie rode a stout bay mare and worked near the rear, where dust and fear made the younger cattle turn. She did not chase them. She widened the line, used her voice, and showed Ben how to leave the frightened animals one open direction. Her size gave her a deep, steady seat when the mare sidestepped, but judgment kept them both upright. At the creek crossing, the lead steers balked at black water between steep banks. Tobias moved forward, but his left shoulder failed when he tried to swing a rope. The loop fell short. His horse shied, and the herd began folding back on itself. Callie saw the crush forming. She rode along the bank instead of into it. "Then, open the right side. Tobias, stop pushing the leaders. Give me one calm cow." They brought an old bell cow from the remuda pasture. Callie led her down a gentler shelf hidden by willow, let her drink, then turned her toward the far bank. The first steers followed the bell. The pressure eased. Within minutes, the herd flowed through the creek in a dark, breathing river. On the far side, Tobias came beside Callie. "You saw that shelf in the dark. I saw the willows growing where hooves could hold." He studied her as if he were finally reading the references she had carried to his gate. "I should have asked what you knew." "Yes." She rode on. By dawn, the clean herd stood on north grass. 17 sick cattle remained in the east pen, and 5 had died. Callie had the carcasses dragged away from water and burned beneath layers of brush while men guarded the fire. She washed her hands with lye soap until the skin reddened, then returned to each living animal. Tobias brought coffee in a tin cup. He set it within reach rather than placing it in her hand. "May I sit?" he asked. Callie nodded toward an overturned bucket. For a time they listened to an ailing cow breathe. "My mother died under a wagon when I was 19, Tobias said. After that I began measuring every worker by whether I thought they could outrun the next accident. I turned fear into a rule and called it good judgment." Callie kept her eyes on the cow. "That explains your mistake. It does not excuse humiliating me." "I know." "Do you?" He set his untouched coffee in the dirt. "I refused you before my men because I wanted certainty to look like strength. Now those men know my certainty nearly cost them their wages and our neighbors their herds. I will not ask you to spare me that truth." It was not a pretty apology. It was better. It asked for nothing. Callie checked the cow's gums again. A little more color had returned. "This one may live." Hope crossed Tobias's face, quick and unguarded. At mid-morning, Wade announced that a veterinary surgeon from Cheyenne would arrive in 2 days. He said it loudly, before the hands, then added that Callie's father had been no proper Army officer and Callie held no diploma. The insult found its target. Callie had heard versions of it in every settlement where she offered help. Her father's work had been real, but his contract title had never impressed men who preferred a framed certificate to a woman's practiced hands. She closed the notebook. "A diploma would not change the color of that urine." Wade smiled. "No, but it may change who answers when the bank asks why valuable cattle were burned." Tobias stepped between them, not close enough to threaten. "The bank will hear that I authorized every order, and when buyers hear Texas fever," Wade asked, "they will close the trail to all of us." Men looked toward the north pasture holding the wages of an entire season. Callie understood that silence could spread the danger to every ranch using the same road. She asked Tobias for the purchase tallies. His ledgers showed no southern cattle. Wade's weekly counts showed 60 extra head entering the south pasture, then disappearing into the general number. "Accounting error," Wade said. Callie ran her finger down the entries. The ink changed midway through the page. The later figures were darker and pressed harder. "Then the error learned to imitate your handwriting." Wade took the book from her. "Ranch arithmetic is not nursing." Tobias took it back. "It is theft if 60 cattle were bought with my money and hidden from my account." Wade's face stayed calm, but the hand at his belt closed. Callie remembered the red hair on the south gate and the fresh brand. Signal was not proof. A ledger with altered numbers showed deceit, but not origin. They needed the man who delivered the cattle or the freight record that paid him. Ben knew of a drover camped near the stage station. He had seen Wade meet the man after midnight 3 weeks earlier. Tobias wanted to ride for him, but Callie looked at the useless angle of his shoulder. "You cannot manage a rope if he runs." "I can still ask a question." "So can I." They rode together because neither trusted Wade alone with the sick pens. Ben stayed behind with written instructions. Before leaving, Callie placed her father's notebook inside a flour tin beneath the cabin floor of the cookhouse, then tore out a copy of the symptom page and folded it into her pocket. She had learned from him that useful evidence should never have only one life. The stage station stood 12 miles east, a low timber building beside a corral white with dust. They found the drover, Amos Pike, preparing to leave. He denied everything until Tobias named the 60 head and Callie described the uncut mark beneath the Cross H brand. Amos looked toward the road. "Bell told me they came from a clean New Mexico herd." "Did you believe him?" Callie asked. "I believed the money." He had a waybill signed at the Cheyenne yard. It listed Texas Longhorns bought cheaply after a Kansas ban made them difficult to sell. Wade had charged Tobias the full price of local shorthorns. "Give me the waybill," Tobias said. Amos laughed without humor. "And let Bell say I forged it?" Callie pointed toward the telegraph office at the rear of the station. "Send the number, date, and seller's name to the Cheyenne yard. Ask them to confirm the duplicate in their book." The operator warned that a reply might not come until evening. Tobias paid for the message. Amos agreed to remain only after Callie promised his testimony would include the fact that Wade deceived him about the health risk. On the ride back, clouds built over the Bighorn foothills. Heat lightning walked along their dark base. "You could leave," Tobias said. "Take Pike's statement to Buffalo and let the territorial stockmen close my ranch." "I could." "Why do you not?" Callie looked across miles of grass holding families' wages, neighbors' breeding stock, and animals innocent of every man's pride. "Because justice is not the same as abandonment. I will stop the fever first. Then I will tell the truth." His expression changed, not with relief, but with something quieter. "That is more mercy than I earned." "It is not for you." "I know." Rain reached them a mile from the ranch. It came hard enough to flatten dust and turn the lower trail to grease. When they arrived, the east pen stood open. The sick cattle were gone. Ben lay beside the gate with blood at his temple. He was breathing. Callie dismounted before her mare stopped and knelt beside him. His skull felt whole, his pupils answered light. A hoof had clipped his shoulder after somebody cut the pen rope and drove the fevered animals west. West led to the common grazing road. Wade was missing. Callie bound Ben's head, braced his shoulder, and ordered 2 men to carry him inside without bending his neck. Then she studied the mud. The sick cattle had been pushed, not wandered. Their tracks mixed with those of 3 horses. Tobias reached for a saddle. "No," Callie said. "If they reach the road, your shoulder will not survive a hard fall, and Wade knows it. He wants you chasing him." "Then what do you propose?" She looked at the rain running toward Bitter Creek. The west road crossed a narrow clay basin before climbing to open range. Sick cattle would tire in the mud. Wade would expect pursuit from behind. "We do not chase. We close the basin." Callie sent riders along the dry ridge to circle ahead. She ordered ropes stretched between cottonwoods at the basin mouth, not as a solid barrier that could snap a horse's legs, but as a fluttering visual line cattle would turn from. Men carried canvas slickers and shook them wide. She and Tobias took the old bell cow along the south edge, where a shallow drainage returned toward the isolation cut. The plan depended on cattle choosing the easiest path. It also depended on Wade not firing a shot. They reached the basin as the missing animals stumbled into it. Wade and 2 loyal riders drove them hard from behind. He saw the canvas line too late. The lead cow turned, the others bunched, confused. Wade drew his revolver and fired into the air. The herd broke toward the drainage, exactly where Callie had placed the bell cow. She called, low and steady, while thunder rolled above them. 1 sick steer veered toward her mare. Tobias moved between them, but his reins slipped when his shoulder gave. Callie caught his bridle, planted her weight deep in the saddle, and turned both horses away from the steer's horns. The impact pulled fire through her arms. For one breath, all she saw was mud and frightened eyes. Then the steer followed the bell cow down the drainage. The sick group moved back toward the stone cut. Wade tried to escape across the basin. His horse sank to the fetlocks and threw him into the mud. Tobias could have ridden him down. Instead, he stopped beside Callie. "Your choice," he said. "The cattle or Belle?" That was the moment she understood he had changed. The man at the gate would have chosen the thief who wounded his pride. The man beside her returned the decision to the person who knew what the greater danger was. "The cattle," she said. They let Wade run on foot while every rider turned the fevered animals. By the time the last one entered the isolation cut, the rain had cooled the air and washed blood from Callie's scraped palm. Tobias wrapped it with his clean neckerchief only after asking permission. Wade reached the bunkhouse before them. He took the altered tally book and set fire to the desk, hoping the storm would hide the smoke. But Callie had already copied the figures onto the back of her father's symptom page, and the original waybill remained with Amos Pike at the stage station. The flour tin protected the notebook. Wade had destroyed furniture, not truth. The ranch hands found him at the supply shed trying to saddle a fresh horse. Tobias did not strike him. "You had 2 chances," Tobias said. "You could have told me where those cattle came from. You could have left the sick animals penned. Instead, you stole, lied, injured a boy, and tried to carry fever onto the public range." Wade looked toward the men who once followed him. None stepped forward. They locked him in the empty grain room and posted 2 guards. At sunset, the telegraph operator arrived with a wet message copied from Cheyenne. The yard ledger confirmed the seller, date, number, and Texas origin of the Longhorns. Amos Pike came with him and identified Wade before every hand. Proof did not arrive like lightning. It came as 3 ordinary things that agreed: an animal's body, a drover's paper, and a distant ledger kept by someone with no reason to protect Hargrove. Tobias sent riders to every neighboring ranch that night. The message carried his name, not Callie's, beneath the admission that cross-age cattle might have exposed the common road. He offered clean pasture, water, and wages to any crew helping inspect stock. He also sent word to the county sheriff and the territorial livestock inspector in Buffalo. The warning cost him a sale before breakfast. It may have saved 3 herds by noon. For 5 days, Callie slept in pieces. She taught crews to separate cattle by symptom and exposure, to inspect the thin skin where ticks gathered, and to keep southern stock away from native animals. She never claimed to know what no one had yet proved. She told them only what her father's observations and the living herd showed. Contact with the Longhorns and their pasture came before the fever, so breaking that contact was their best defense. Of the 17 sick cattle, 9 died. 8 recovered slowly. Of the hundreds moved north before symptoms appeared, nearly all remained standing. The veterinary surgeon from Cheyenne arrived on the 4th day. Dr. Edwin Shaw wore a black coat despite the heat, and looked at Callie with the caution of a man entering a room where his conclusion had already begun without him. He examined the dead, the living, the ticks, the notebook, and the waybill. "I cannot certify the carrier," he said. "No man I know can." Wade, brought under guard for the inspection, smiled. Dr. Shaw closed his case. "But I can certify the diagnosis as Texas fever and the separation measures as sound. Miss Reyes acted with more discipline than many graduates I've trained." The smile left Wade's face. At the hearing in Buffalo, Callie did not sit behind Tobias. She stood at the table beside him. Amos testified to the delivery. Ben testified that Wade cut the pen rope and struck him when he tried to stop the cattle. The telegraph copy matched the Cheyenne Yard's duplicate. Dr. Shaw explained the disease and made clear that Callie's early isolation had limited the loss. Wade was charged with theft, assault, destruction of property, and reckless endangerment under the authorities available to the territory. The bank did not seize Crossage, but it demanded a costly new inspection and delayed Tobias's sale. His punishment was not ruin. It was responsibility. He paid the neighboring ranches for every lost animal tied to the common road. He paid the hands through quarantine. He sold the hidden Longhorns only under the livestock inspector's restrictions, taking the loss himself. Then he posted a notice at his gate, signed in his own hand, naming Callie Reyes as the practitioner whose judgment had preserved the herd. Callie made him remove the word heroic. "Accurate is enough," she said. By September, the fever had burned out with the first hard frosts. Tobias's shoulder healed because he finally allowed it to rest. Ben returned to light work. Callie used her wages to rent a small stable beside the road to Buffalo. Neighboring ranch wives scrubbed the room. Hands built pens with separate gates. Dr. Shaw mailed her 2 second-hand veterinary texts and a letter stating that competence deserved recognition even when institutions were slow to grant it. Tobias brought a brass plate for the stable door. It read, "Callie Reyes, stock nurse and livestock practitioner." "You checked the spelling?" she asked. 4 times. "And you expect nothing for it?" "The plate is payment for the public notice you made me rewrite 6 times. 7. His mouth lifted. "Then I still owe you one." Callie looked at the man who had once judged the space she occupied and now stood carefully outside her doorway, waiting to be invited across it. "You may hang it," she said. He did, level on the first attempt. When the work was finished, Tobias removed his hat. "May I call on you Sunday?" Callie let the silence stretch long enough for him to understand that gratitude was not courtship, and apology was not ownership. "You may bring supper," she said. "I will decide whether you stay for it." Relief warmed his weathered face. "That is fair. It is a beginning." At sunset, the old bell cow crossed the yard and rang the small iron bell that had led 800 frightened animals through black water. Above her, Callie's name caught the last gold light on the stable door. Tobias stood beside her, not in front of her, while the road beyond the gate remained open in both directions. Prairie rose here. Callie's mercy did not mean pretending Tobias had never wounded her, and Tobias's apology mattered only because he accepted the cost of making things right. What saved that herd was not a miracle cure. It was knowledge planted over years, the courage to speak before certainty was fashionable, and a woman who refused to confuse revenge with justice. Have you ever chosen to help someone while still requiring them to answer for the harm they caused? Share your thoughts in the comments, because dignity grows strongest when compassion keeps its boundaries. Until our next trail, may you trust the worth that shallow eyes fail to see.